So today we're going to review a little bit with classical conditioning to start, and then afterwards we're going to get into discussing operant conditioning. So you all have your clickers. In the first question it says, in classical conditioning, the term for the thing that becomes the conditioned stimulus prior to conditioning. In the scenario of classical conditioning, what is the thing that becomes the conditioned stimulus called? Is it the unconditioned stimulus, the unconditioned response, the neutral stimulus, the conditioned stimulus, the conditioned response, or none of the above? Remember, you'll see these things abbreviated often in reading. So you'll see CR. CR stands for conditioned response. UCR, unconditioned response. So again, what is the term for the thing that becomes the conditioned stimulus but before conditioning? So the answer in this instance is going to be the neutral stimulus. The neutral stimulus. So most people got this correct. Again, if it's the stimulus, it doesn't change from stimulus to response. It always stays a stimulus. The response always stays a response. Unconditioned stimulus, again, conditioning is a type of learning. So if it's unconditioned, it's unlearned. You don't have to teach somebody it. So in conditioning, you have learning. So the answer in this instance is the neutral stimulus. Okay, next question. In Pavlov's experiments, the bell or the sound before conditioning has occurred is called what? In Pavlov's experiments, the bell or the sound before conditioning has occurred is referred to as what? So before conditioning, that would be the neutral stimulus. So before conditioning, the bell is going to be the neutral stimulus. Did you get, you're like, the answer before was neutral, so I'm not going to answer that again? Is that what you're thinking? Because you have to learn to associate the bell with the food, right? In Pavlov's example, the dogs were learning to associate the bell with the food. So the bell's not going to cause the dogs to salivate. When they see the food, the bell is not going to cause the dogs to salivate. The bell itself. The food will, the bell won't. So since the bell is not producing a response of salivation before conditioning, there's no response, it's neutral. It doesn't do anything. So remember, unconditioned means unlearned. You don't have to teach the dogs to salivate when they see food. In Pavlov's experiments, the behavior of salivating, which is caused by hearing a bell or a sound. The behavior of salivating, if it is caused by hearing the bell or the sound. The behavior of salivating, if it's caused by hearing a bell or a sound, again, you have to learn to associate the bell with the food, right? So if it's a learned response, it's going to be a conditioned response. Conditioned response. In Pavlov's experiments, the food itself or the smell of the food is what? The food itself or the smell of the food is what? So the food itself or the smell of the food would be the unconditioned stimulus. Okay, it's not going to be neutral because the dogs automatically know that they should salivate when they see the food. You don't have to teach them it, right? And they will salivate, so it can't be neutral or conditioned. Everybody got it right in terms of stimulus. So if you see a question like a scenario, the first thing I would ask is it talking about the stimulus or the response? Is it the behavior of the organism, or is it something that affects them? If it's something that affects them, it has to be stimulus, right? If it's how they're behaving, it has to be the response. And then from there, I would ask myself, is it before or after conditioning? And that helps you to narrow it down. Okay, next one. In Pavlov's experiments, the behavior of salivating after seeing or smelling the food. The behavior of salivating after seeing or smelling the food. Okay, so the word here, behavior, indicates that it's a response, right? And it's after seeing or smelling the food. Do you have to learn about how to respond to food if you're a dog? No. So it's going to be the unconditioned response. Again, it's not the conditioned response because you would have to learn something for it to be the conditioned response. And since that's an automatic response, it's biologically programmed, you don't have to teach the dog it. It's unconditioned or unlearned. In Pavlov's experiments, the sound of the bell itself, if it causes the dogs to salivate. In Pavlov's experiments, the sound of the bell itself, if it causes the dogs to salivate. So the sound of the bell itself, is that behavior? Is that something that affects the dog? It affects the dog, so if it's affecting the dog, is it a stimulus or a response? Stimulus, so we know that, right? So in this instance, this would be the conditioned stimulus. It's not response again because the sound of the bell itself is not what the dogs are doing. It's something that's affecting them, right? So you are correct in saying it's conditioned though, because it's after the conditioned response has been taught. Okay, new scenario. This is an example of a taste aversion, similar to the example I gave in class with the Fruity Pebbles that I ate and ran the sprints and felt sick, right? So this is a taste aversion. Let's imagine Andrea. She drank a bunch of Powerade, and now she drank that when she was sick. Now just smelling Powerade makes her feel ill. The Powerade itself after conditioning has occurred. The Powerade itself after conditioning has occurred. What would that be an example of? Okay, let's take a little break here now, and I want you to explain your answer to your partner in this instance. Why did you answer the way you did? What did you answer? Okay, let's talk through this now. In this instance, the Powerade itself, after conditioning, is the Powerade a behavior of the person?
No.
No, so because of that, what does it have to be?
Stimulus.
Stimulus, okay? It's after conditioning and it had to be learned. So because of that, the Powerade itself is going to be the conditioned stimulus. Remember, it's not the response because the response is what the organism is doing. Okay, next one. The Powerade itself before conditioning. Hit the button, all right? The Powerade itself before conditioning would be the neutral stimulus, not the unconditioned stimulus. Unless she was like allergic to Powerade or something, right? The Powerade's not going to cause her to feel sick. So, if it's something that she didn't have to learn to feel sick in response to drinking or whatever, then it would be unconditioned. So like rotten milk, right? Rotten milk, whatever. And I don't want to explain that fully now because there's a question that relates to it. Okay, same scenario. Feeling ill after conditioning has occurred. Feeling ill after conditioning has occurred, assuming that the feeling of being ill is caused by the Powerade. Feeling ill after conditioning. So the feeling is something the organism does, right? It's a manifestation of organism's behavior. So because of that, it's a response. The answer in this instance would be the conditioned response. Same scenario. Feeling sick before conditioning occurred. So, Feeling sick because of something that you didn't have to learn about. So again, the feeling is something the organism does, so it's not a stimulus. So the answer in this instance is the unconditioned response. Okay, feeling sick, again, is not what is affecting the person, so it can't be the stimulus. Same scenario again. Whatever made Andrea sick in the first place. So the flu virus, whatever it was that made her sick in the first instance, what would that be? Okay, so whatever made her sick in the first place, is that her behavior or is it what's affecting her? So what's affecting her, so it has to be, is it a stimulus or response? It has to be a stimulus. So the answer in this instance is unconditioned stimulus. Why isn't it neutral?
Because it affects her.
Because it did affect her, right? It made her feel sick. So it's not neutral. And it's something that is outside of her, so it's a stimulus. So the answer is the unconditioned stimulus. Does anybody have any questions about classical conditioning briefly at this time? I would say on the quiz, 20-question quiz on Friday, I looked through it, I think 13 of the questions are scenarios, and you have to identify what the neutral stimulus is, or some of the scenarios relate to operant conditioning. So punishment and reinforcement, that's what we're talking about today, okay? So, at this point in time, you can put your clickers away and then take out your notes and we'll discuss operant conditioning.